Hello everyone, and welcome to the first webinar in our new webinar series, Management Matters. Today's webinar will focus on budgeting for your lab. I'm Kaylee Thomas, the Events Manager for Lab Manager Magazine, and I will be your moderator today. We like our webinars to be very interactive, so we encourage you to send us your questions at any point during the webinar, and our speaker will address these during the question and answer session following the presentation. To ask a question, simply type your query into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. We will try to address as many questions as possible during the question and answer session. If we happen to run out of time, I will forward any unanswered questions to the presenter, and he can respond to you via email. With that, let me introduce our speaker. Dr. John Borchardt has worked as a bench chemist, team leader, group leader, and technology manager for 3 large companies, Hercules, Halliburton Services, and Royal Dutch Shell, and a small specialty company, Toma Products. He is currently the president of South Haven Communications. He has written more than 130 peer-reviewed research papers and holds 30 U.S. patents. He is the author of a book called Career Management for Scientists and Engineers. Welcome, John.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. We're going to talk about what's probably not terribly popular subject, and that is budgeting. Budgeting is one of those things that nobody really likes to do, but it has to be done. So if we're going to do it, let's try to do it efficiently and effectively. So from the time research has started, and we're going to focus on industrial research, to the present day, people have had to budget their funds. When you don't, you end up with a huge deficit like the American government currently has. But it's a long-standing concern for lab managers going all the way back to Thomas Edison's day. And this photo is a photo of the restored Edison laboratory at Menlo Park, where Thomas Edison did his most productive work. And he certainly had to work on a budget. So what are some budget basics? Well, the budget is a short-term plan for the future. Usually funds are allocated and spent on a year-to-year basis. Even when a project is a multi-year project, ordinarily the budget is set a year at a time. The objective of the lab budget is to guide the laboratory's efforts during the next fiscal period. For some of us, that's a calendar. For others, it's a fiscal year. The usual fiscal year, if it's not a calendar year, begins July 1st. The lab budget is ordinarily part of a broader, longer-term strategic plan. This is true whether one is an industrial lab, whether it is a government lab, or even an academic lab. And the place to begin is what's called a SWOT analysis, S-W-O-T. That means looking at your organization, its strengths, its weaknesses, opportunities. In this case, we're going to be talking industrial labs, so opportunities for business growth, and also threats to the business. And we're going to analyze each of those for each of the employer's product lines as part of the budget process. To do this means lab managers have to consult with their staff, with business managers, and with sales personnel. Good salespeople are constantly bringing in information regarding opportunities for business growth, new product sales, new sales of existing products, and also weaknesses or threats to existing business. And lab managers also generally meet with senior level business managers and senior level corporate managers to look at possible constraint issues and budgeting and funding requirements. Constraint issues have to do with just how much money is available. Once the laboratory budget, and don't worry, we're going to go back and talk about this, but once the lab budget is established and approved, the spending performance of the organization and of the laboratory managers is measured against this budget. So budgeting doesn't really happen just once. It's a continuing activity throughout the year so that you can be sure you're spending at the appropriate levels at the appropriate time. There's been some survey results on laboratory budgeting, and they indicate that monitoring your budget spending is typically done on a monthly basis. So that means a dozen times during the year you're getting a report probably from your CFO's office, and they're telling you how much you have spent. In many cases, particularly in academic labs, the lead researcher is preparing these reports directly and then sharing them with the appropriate people in the research group. The actual spending, you'd like to have that come close to the amount that you budgeted. If indeed you get a pretty good match between your budget and how much you're actually spending, that indicates that you and your coworkers understand the business and its spending requirements and have those under control. If your actual spending is either dramatically above or below that which was budgeted at the beginning of the calendar or fiscal year, that suggests that you aren't controlling your spending or the R&D process. And that can lead to major problems both for the employer and for the lab managers personally, since their performance evaluations and their salary raises and their bonuses could suffer as a result of inappropriate spending, whether the spending is substantially above or substantially below that originally budgeted. The photo on the right is of the DuPont experimental station. There are some very large pharmaceutical laboratories as well, but I think you can see from this photo the large number of buildings depicted in the photo that you're talking about a lot of people spending a lot of money. So the research budget is not a minor exercise. It's something very major. At the 3 of the 4 companies, at the 3 larger companies I worked for, putting together the annual budget was ordinarily a 4 or 5 month process. It's very political in that a lot of compromises have to be made. Individual researchers, individual department managers are busy advocating for more money to be allotted to their particular programs. So a lot of compromises have to be made. And it is a very time-consuming process. Novice managers may think that their bosses will be really pleased if they spend substantially under budget. However, I've already mentioned this is not good necessarily, because spending drastically under budget can result in understaffing. You don't have enough people to get the required amount of work done. That can result in low morale. That can result in disgruntled lab members and poor productivity. So understaffing often results in missed deadlines and missed opportunities. So if one has a budget, say, that was budgeted for 10 bench chemists, you should be spending enough to support approximately 10 bench chemists. Of course, you can allocate money in different ways, and that may not be 10 bench chemists. That might be 7 bench chemists and 8 laboratory technicians or something. It's up to the laboratory manager to take that salary line in the budget and decide how it's going to be spent, as well as which project it's going to be spent on. More money doesn't solve all the lab manager's problems. In fact, sometimes throwing money at a project, it not only does it not solve the problem, but it may lead to money being appropriated and spent in incorrect ways. I was on one project where one of the chemists saw a new NMR that one of the instrument companies had developed and thought, this NMR is really cool. He wanted one. He talked his manager into buying it. The problem was they really didn't have problems for it to work on. So they had this cool NMR that they always showed to visitors in the lab, but it really wasn't doing much productive work for the company. So you need to spend your money in a productive way, no matter how much money you have to spend. So looking at our SWOT analysis, our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats, use those to generate a list of projects to work on in your coming calendar or fiscal year. And then prioritize those projects, because chances are you're going to want to do more than you have money to fund. Customers, suppliers, sales representatives, marketing executives, and plant managers may all have useful input in defining what this list of projects is going to be and what the funding needs for those projects are going to be. For example, when they call on customers, sales personnel can discuss what the customers are asking for. Plant managers may request that various projects be undertaken to improve plant operations, to improve yields, to limit impurities, a whole host of technical challenges. So it's important for lab managers to seek input from all these stakeholders. And one should not forget your own staff members. An excellent way to bring in project ideas is to have your staff members attend appropriate technical conferences, talk to customers and potential customers at these conferences, see what their wish list is and how your company might be able to meet those needs. And that often requires performing R&D projects. So cutting your conference attendance budget to limit your spending often can be very counterproductive. So you're working on defining a list of projects. You requested input. And one of the problems in terms of coming up with a budget in a timely way is getting that input, receiving that input, so that you can work on it on schedule. So things don't come in 3 weeks after you needed to see the information. Once you get all that input in, once you studied it, you can begin defining preliminary budgets for each project on the list. And this is a time when, unless something is absolutely out of left field, and nearly ridiculous, don't throw anything out yet. Keep all those ideas in the mix, all those project ideas. The next step, having generated a list, and it will probably be a list of projects far greater than you can actually work on, is to consider outsourcing. Because one of the things companies are most reluctant, particularly since the Great Recession, most reluctant to spend money on is staff, hiring additional staff. So outsourcing can be a cost-effective way to get work done that wouldn't be done otherwise. So one needs, as part of the budgeting process, to obtain cost estimates for the work from outside firms and compare these costs to those of doing the work in-house. While one often thinks of things like building and grounds crews, building maintenance, janitorial services, company security, the company cafeteria, the company library, one also needs to look at R&D as well. What can you get done in a more cost-effective way using outside people? So, and particularly capital and staff-intensive spending is something to consider outsourcing. A number of companies, particularly oil refineries, have actually sold their instrumentation to analytical labs, contract analytical labs, and transferred their own employees to these contract analytical labs where they are working on solving problems and performing analyses both for the original owner and their original employer, but also the contract analytical lab will take on work from outside customers and keep expensive instrumentation more productively occupied. And that means they can afford to charge the original company, the refinery, or whatever, less money per analysis, since they have more analyses coming in from more customers than just one. Particularly suited for outsourcing are instrumental analyses and short-term projects. So you're working on this budget. You're working on it at least much of the time, not alone, but with other people, with lab staff members, with business managers, with salespeople even. And one way to get all this information organized and get the budget completed on time is to borrow from the principles of project management. And there are several very good articles on project management in the labmanager.com website. If you go and keyword search within the website on project management, you'll find these articles. As I say, there are at least 6 or 8 of these articles. And you are working from the end point backwards. So you, the lab manager, know the date on which the budget must be submitted to upper management for approval. And they, in turn, have to complete it on time. But working backwards from the lab manager's target completion date, you can then set up a timetable for completing each step of the budget process. In essence, each step of the budget process becomes what's called a project milestone. So this enables you to on a continuing basis monitor how well the process of establishing a budget is proceeding. If you needed to complete milestone 1 in 8 weeks and you get it done in 7, that indicates you're in pretty good shape. For example, and you move on to the next milestone a week early. The reverse of that, a delay in achieving a milestone, immediately alerts everyone involved in the budget process to the fact they must speed things up, adjust the timing of the remaining process steps so that the budget may be completed on deadline. Another principle of project management is some project steps can be accomplished more quickly if they proceed in parallel rather than waiting to accomplish one milestone before you start working on the next. And there's various diagrams that can actually be used to track this sort of progress and to decide whether you can work on things sequentially or simultaneously. And again, this is covered in these project management articles in Lab Manager. And they apply to many, many things besides just working on a budget. So you've adopted a project management mindset when working on the budget. Hopefully you're able to develop some aspects of the budget in parallel rather than sequentially. And this may enable you to reduce the length of the budgeting process or to respond more quickly to delays in the budget process to get things back on schedule more quickly. So once you've got all your input collected, you know all the projects, the research, the development, the customer technical service, plant support, you can take all these projects and group them into 3 groups. Essential ones that must be worked on. Those have been identified in the SWOT analysis. Ones that are nice to do. They'll increase your business, but they're not critical. And thirdly, projects to do only after the first 2 categories are well in hand. This lets you prioritize, and based on these work estimates and the cost of each project and each stage in the project, you can then draw up and submit a budget. And again, you're not working alone on this. You're constantly getting input and exchanging information from the appropriate individuals. This may be your own staff members. This may be plant managers. This may be a host of other people supplying services and work time to the projects. So among other things, this approach is effective in funding your overall research development tech service program, but also focusing on meeting customers' needs for tech service. Many times, to reduce the overall budget spending, people will be tempted to cut their technical service program. And usually that causes problems later, because when the customers start complaining, they need this, that, or the other fixed, you're going to have to find the money to do that. If it's not originally in the budget, you're going to have a problem. So you're either going to have to develop a fallback position. You know, if we start getting quality control problem complaints from one of our big customers, where are we going to find the money? So this means making changes while R&D is in progress. You can think of it sort of like halftime at a football game. The team goes into the locker room and tries to figure out how to do things better when they're in the middle of the game. And should there be, as sometimes occurs, should there be budget cuts, either late in the budgeting process or even after the budget has been approved, you can then delete lower priority projects from the budget. And this, politically, this is a very good thing, because once you start eliminating projects from the budget, you start getting disagreements, and you start having all kinds of problems that reduce work satisfaction and work progress as well. So you can actually have the budget contribute to making the lab a happy workplace if you can avoid some of these mid-course corrections that result in disagreements between managers. So the budget, once you have your draft budget, and you are ordinarily putting this together with a spending limitation for the sake of round numbers, let's call it $1 million. You've got $1 million to spend on your annual R&D. And you then take this to senior managers, first at the laboratory, and then so we've got the budget reviewed first by higher level R&D managers, then the senior level business managers look at it. They may or may not be looking at it in conference with the lab managers, high-level lab managers. And then it goes to the chief financial officer's office for their analysis, and they may have some input of their own to contribute, primarily from the standpoint of, well, our company revenues are 5% over expectations, so the budget is in good shape, or, hey, sales are falling, we need to start economizing and spending less money on the budget. So there may or may not be mid-course corrections on the budget. And these often have sizable impacts when rapid changes to the business are occurring. These certainly occurred in 2008. I began seeing it in my own business actually in late 2007. Around October, I started seeing my customers spending less money, telling me don't do this and don't do that in my consulting work. So mid-course corrections can be very important, and both in terms of mid-course corrections and analyzing your spending trends from year to year can be extremely useful. Here we have 3 different projects, technology blue, technology red, technology green, and we've tracked the spending for these projects over a, call it a 3-year period, with year 4 being a budgeted year. And what you see there is technology blue, a slow decline. Maybe this is a fairly mature technology where spending needs decrease from year to year because there are a few problems to be solved. Technology red is something that is moving up and down a bit, but not in a major way. Technology green is interesting because what you see is a steadily increasing budget with and actual spending in years 1 to 3. And year 4, you see big jump in the budget. And if you set up these bar charts like this and look at your spending, you've got to start asking yourself, why is there that big jump in year 4 on technology green? And it may be for some very good reasons, like, okay, you've solved the major technical issues. Now you're going to move to the pilot plant and spend money making larger volumes of material to send out for customer sampling if you're trying to market a new chemical product. Or maybe you need to manufacture product for some drug clinical trials. So maybe very good reasons for that increase. However, there could be some dubious ones as well. That is, what if you had some technical problems early on in years 1 and 2, and you've been trying to solve them without success? So you're spending more money every year, but making relatively little progress. And I got a very good lab budgeting lesson. Although at the time I didn't realize I was even getting a lesson, but on my very first job, right out of school, I was involved on the periphery of a large research program. And I came in on the equivalent of about year 4 into that program, and they had been spending more money for several years trying to improve product quality. When they made the product on a lab benchtop in a small flask, everything was great. The product properties were wonderful. When they scaled it up to pilot plant levels of, say, 1,000 pounds, they were not getting the good product quality they needed to justify the price of the product. They redesigned the pilot plant a couple of times. That did not solve the problem. We were into like the equivalent of the technology green stage 4 situation, and basically we hadn't moved the technology forward in 3 or 4 years. But the company upper-level R&D managers remained very committed to that product, because if we could make it as good in the pilot plant as we could in a 250 milliliter flask, it was going to be a very profitable product. Well, after spending all this money for several years and seeing the technology green spending go up and up without progress being made, some heads started to roll. The VP of research, the laboratory manager at the research center, and the department manager, they all lost their jobs. A number of people actually involved in the program were laid off as well, and the project budget basically disappeared. And that was a bit of a shell shocker, because back then layoffs were much less common than they are now. But anyway, that is sort of the doomsday event, at least for individuals, and that is losing your job because your budget was mismanaged and no one responded to problems with the project that dictated a change in the budget. And I've seen 3 or 4 cases since then, fortunately not involving layoffs, but this was a very important message for me. There's a phrase, throwing good money after bad. You really don't want to do that, of course. And what people were doing were just gritting their teeth and spending. The biggest single category budget is salaries. You know, I mentioned when Technology Green Project was terminated, people lost their jobs. And one reason for that, the biggest reason, is that is the most obvious way to cut spending, in that you can put some of your best people on different projects, but with the death of a project, the potential revenue from the project results is not going to happen. So that means somehow, in some way, spending has to be reduced. That's also one reason for outsourcing. If the technology green project involved a lot of outsourcing, then you can just terminate the outsourcing contract and your own company's employees are not affected. But another big budget item that may be in the capital budget or actually in the laboratory budget is laboratory construction, maintenance, and security. This is a shot. I think it's an interesting shot because of the timing. This is construction of a large laboratory at Royal Dutch Shell's West Hollow Technology Center, and the company committed to the project in early 2007. And they didn't actually start construction until around September of 2008. And if you recall, we were in the depths of the Great Recession then. And the West Hollow Technology Center was the Chemical Products Research Center. So here's this big building going up right when money is getting very short. And what they did, in this case, they maintained the commitment to the construction of the laboratory on the premise that when the laboratory was completed and operational, the general economy would turn around and they would have plenty of work to fill the space in the building. And they made some strategic changes as to what kind of work that would be, and the building is now completed and operational. But instead of being only chemical products, they're also doing some oil technology, oil production technology work in that building as well. But there are some cases where it's very difficult to stop spending money. Certainly building construction is one, although I'm sure there are some laboratory buildings out there whose construction was at least temporarily halted during the depths of the Great Recession. And I know a lot of office buildings for companies around the country also were put into hiatus during the worst months of the recession, just because the money just wasn't there to pay for it. So that brings us to the conclusion of the organized presentation, and I hope I've indicated, first of all, that budgeting is a complex project, and it seldom is it fun. It's not like Christmas shopping, and it's also a very, very necessary one. And one thing that I thought was quite interesting is when I worked for my last employer, a small specialty chemicals company, Toma Products, that was acquired since I worked there by Air Products, but they actually had every bench chemist as well as the R&D managers involved very actively in the budgetary process. So at this point, I will be happy to answer questions.
Thanks, John. That was excellent. Having just completed our budget, I know that it can be a tedious task, but it is an important one.
Okay, well, was that your budget for 2012?
No, we're doing the budget for 2013.
Okay, well, you're in good shape because I work for one employer who shall remain nameless. It wasn't Toma Products, so their budgeting was efficient. But for one large company, where our budget was finally approved in March or April of the spending year.
Oh, wow.
So if they do their budget in the same way, they'll approve their 2013 budget in March or April.
Goodness. No, we did it, well, actually, we actually did ours in November, December, so, and I just got it finalized. So we're ahead of the game, luckily. So hopefully some of your tips will help people if they are still working on theirs, or give them some things to think about for next year when planning their budget. So we've had a few questions that have come in, John. The first one is, in preparing a lab budget, what are the constraint issues that you mentioned?
Well, one is how many dollars you have. And another is corporate culture. There's some companies that are very short-term oriented. You know, I was working for one employer where they considered a one-year project long-term research. And since I had come from a company that was the opposite of that was a bit of a shocker. So if you're in a very short horizon type of company, you're going to have difficulties in getting longer term, whatever their definition, longer term projects are. You're going to have problems getting those approved. And the ideal way is to figure out, okay, how can I take a project like that and set up useful interim goals? You know, like we want, you know, a current project is in NASA is we want to go to Mars. Well, an interim shorter term project is going back to the moon. So you're putting in interim steps that will be useful in and of themselves. And another way, frankly, that I use quite a bit is I talked about customer input. If I or a business manager or a sales rep can come into a company and say, boy, this important customer or this customer that would be important if they gave us the business really needs such and such done, and it's going to require a fairly expensive research project. If you can come in and bring that political factor in, and I was working at Halliburton Services where something of the sort occurred. My boss attended a technical conference, came back, and he said, here's the new project I want you to work on. And it was very technically challenging. In fact, I recall saying to him at our initial discussion, it can't be done. One of those times when you learn, you know, never say that. Never say can't. But anyway, it was coming from several fairly large customers. And it was a problem, an oil production problem, that they had just lived with for many, many, many years. And my boss said, well, gee, if you had something that would do such and such, it'd solve that problem. And they say, oh, that would be great. Can you do that for us? And they said that in a very serious way, not in a flip way like I just did. And he came back and he said, boy, we need a special budget item because it was September. We need to start this right away, not wait until next year to start spending the money. And as it turned out, a couple of years later, we had the product that met their requirements, and this product was brought to the field in about, let me get my years straight, about 1982 when there had been a sharp drop in the oil price, and Halliburton Services budget, or revenues, I mean, and all our competitors were down. Oil price was down. People were just not spending a lot of money to increase or even maintain oil production from their fields. So nobody really wanted to spend more money on the oil field, and we had a product that made hydraulic fracturing much more cost effective. And by the way, you're seeing a lot of that getting used with the current shale oil work around the country, because basically it enables you to use fewer chemicals and less water to hydraulically fracture a well and get good oil production results. But pardon the commercial. But anyway, so it's a good idea, I think, for managers always to have that one word, budget, at the back of their mind.
All right, so we've had quite a few more questions that have come in, John, so hopefully we can cover them. Do you have any suggestions in how to sway upper management to authorize the purchase of expensive yet very necessary equipment? And they may not necessarily understand why the equipment is needed.
Yeah. What I get a chuckle out of, I'm a fan of the TV show NCIS, and the PhD chemist there, incidentally, they identified her as a PhD chemist, Abby Sciuto, always starts a long, detailed, technical explanation to her boss. And Mark Harmon is standing there saying, just give me the bottom line. I don't have time for this. And she has to backtrack and explain it in terms that he understands. And I think walking in with a prepared argument and talk about the benefits, say, of an expensive instrument. Don't talk about the features. Talk about the benefits and how those benefits will serve the goals of the research project, namely completing it on time and on budget and resulting in more profits for the company. And I've seen it a bunch of times, and I've done it myself, and that it is hard for many of us to get out of the mode of talking really technical, because that's what we're excited about. But you've got to bring it down to, in quote marks, a layman's description of what you need. And I think if you have somebody that used to be a teacher who's on your lab staff, they can be very good at taking something complex and providing a fairly simple explanation.
Okay, we have another question that has to do with doing budgets well in advance. So since budgets are generally prepared well in advance at the start of a fiscal year, what is the process for updates? Do those changes appear on the actual budget, or is there some other mechanism for making updates?
Okay. Well, first, nearly all companies, in one manner or another, do monthly monitoring of their spending. And of course, say if you have a $1.2 million budget, that doesn't mean you're going to spend $100,000 each and every month. You know, it just depends when the big spending items come due. But frequent, periodic monitoring of the spending is one way. And another way is to have a reserve fund that you can tap for surprise projects that come up that are well worth doing, but you really have a problem with cutting back on any other research. So those are two obvious ways to handle that problem. Can you re-ask that question? I might not have answered it well.
Yep, I can re-ask it. So since budgets are generally prepared in advance of the start of the fiscal year, what is the process for updates? And do those changes appear in the actual budget, or is there some other mechanism for making updates?
Okay, well, those items should definitely appear in the budget. And it, as I said, reserve fund is one idea. Another is to have the appropriate committee, which is usually chaired by the CFO or co-chaired by the Chief Financial Officer and the R&D manager, is to have a special meeting and say, number one, do we need to fund this? Number two, if we do, how much? And that the two companies I worked for actually budgeted a reserve fund which was tapped at the discretion of the vice president of research. So unless you're essentially at the top of the research ladder, you've got to persuade somebody higher up the ladder to give the go-ahead on that money. And it's not going to be spent on the annual Christmas party.
Okay. And then we have another question. What would you say is the major difference between budgeting a small lab and a corporation?
Well, I think the issues are probably clearer to people at a small lab. A bigger percentage of the people at a small lab are involved in the process. As I mentioned, when I worked for Toma Products, essentially every bench chemist was involved, and so were the plant managers, and they would attend the lab budget meetings. And that was one way it's better. Another way is everybody knows everybody. I think the projects or the resolving issues probably is less political. The problem is not that the problems are smaller, it's that everybody knows everybody and has a better understanding of how they think.
That makes sense. Now, sort of along the same lines, people are asking questions about will budgeting or the process for budgeting differ based on the type of lab? So say, would a budget for a forensic lab be different from a food and beverage lab or a commercial lab?
Okay, I think in a broad sense the budgeting is similar. But when you start getting into the details of things, the budget process may be very different, or at least the budget items very different depending on what type of company and what size company. For instance, a pharmaceutical company will have to spend very large sums of money on clinical trials, even when they're dead certain. This is probably a bad term to use referring to drugs, but even when they're very certain that they developed a new drug that will be effective in treating a particular disease. That is just the first stage, and then they have to do a series of clinical trials, number one, to verify the effectiveness, but number two, to look at side effects of drugs. And some drugs even do go out with side effects. Like I take a drug that has niacin in it, and until I got used to the drug, I wake up 2 or 3 times a night with every square inch of skin I have itching like crazy. It was a side effect of the drug. And somebody at FDA decided, well, what would you rather do, lose your life or lose some sleep? And went ahead and approved the drug. So there are certain stages of research that just do not occur for some companies, but do for others. When I worked for Halliburton Services, we spent very large sums of money on field testing new chemical products. And that meant making adequate volumes of chemical to go out and treat oil and gas wells. And you would be there, in addition to just treating them, you'd be experimenting with different wells, with different amounts of chemical, with different additives, etc. So all of that can be quite costly, and it has to be factored in to the costs. Then, as I mentioned, there are occasionally political factors that have to be dealt with. Sometimes your new product may cannibalize work from an existing product made by another department at your firm. And one of the things I learned working for Toma Products, which was privately held, is that when it came down to the nitty-gritty, all decisions were in a sense made by one individual, the owner of the company. So if you could convince Mr. King that this is the way it should be with regards to funding a research project, he would go with that. And again, if you had to have effective arguments, then you really blow your credibility if you did that a couple of times too many and were wrong. At another company, I had a manager decide, well, gee, you know, we use a lot of cement in our company. We have a lot of waste cement, you know, that gets hardened and that, or construction project teardowns. It would be nice if we could just, you know, smash up that cement into small particles, add water, and make new cement. That's not the way the chemistry works. But people spend about 4 months working to prove them wrong. So you have to use good judgment, and if you're sure you're right, you know, then really push for something, because that is the way individuals really get ahead on things.
All right, thanks, John. This brings us to the end of today's webinar. If we did not get to your question during the question and answer session, please be assured that I will be forwarding your questions to John, and he will get back to you via email. Please consider reaching out to John directly, as he is the true expert in this field. His contact information, as you can see, is available on the screen. We would like to remind you that this is an ongoing educational webinar series. If you have any suggestions for this series, please do not hesitate to contact us. The webinar video will be available tomorrow at the URL on your screen. As well, I would like to thank all of our attendees for taking time out of their busy schedules to join us today. Please consider tuning in to our next webinar tomorrow to find out how an ELN can benefit your lab. Simply visit labmanager.com for more details. Thank you and goodbye.